Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. She was burned at the stake in real life and history because of believing that she would hear the voice of God and that God spoke to her through angels and through the cloud of witnesses and through saints, and not having to have a mediator from the Pope or from these bishops or cardinals, but a simple peasant girl from Lorraine could actually hear God's voice outside of the institutional religious church system, which was considered blasphemy, which is one of the reasons why she was burned at the stake, amongst other things of leading the French army to victory. But that played out in my life and my family's life, and it still does, because of the intense cost of the calling of God upon my life and my family's life, of standing for what we believe against religious institutional powers of organized religion. Because throughout me and my parents and our family's life, we've tried to bring a Reformation message to the institutional organized Christian church. And that message is this, that we believe that everybody is empowered as a kingdom of priests. It says that in the book of Exodus. It says that in the book of 1 Peter, that there is a kingdom of priests unto God, and that when Jesus died on the cross and resurrected, he tore the veil, and the old system of one mediator, one pastor, one prophet, one apostle, one priest ended. And Jesus empowered everybody to go back to Eden again with no barrier, to be able to speak to God for themselves, but not through religious control.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Melting Pot episode. Today, I am in conversation with the multifaceted Caleb Mathews. So thank you so much for joining me today, Caleb.
Payal, thank you so much. It is great to be here on the Melting Pot. I think a lot of interesting things are going to cook up in our conversation, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. I'm also looking forward to, and when I said multifaceted, I definitely meant it. Caleb, let's start from the very beginning. What was the moment or what was the experience that first actually woke you up to this deeper sense of calling and purpose?
I love that question. That one is something that I get asked quite a few times on podcasts and in speaking engagements and sessions, one that I'm happy to answer. And that is, my journey really began of my awakening, my spiritual awakening, my just impactful beginning to my life at the age of 6. Now, many people in the audience may think, okay, 6 years old, that's pretty intense. But yes, 6 years old was one of the first main memories I can recall, was having vivid dreams and night encounters of the night season when I was 6 years old. Very vivid dream experiences, things that a child can't possibly dream up, no pun intended, on their own, especially because I was raised in a home that didn't have cable television or weren't really movie watchers. So when these stories and these metaphors and these allegories would play themselves out in dreams as a language to be decoded, that's when it began for me at the age of 6. And from that point on, I realized it wasn't just life happening to me. There is more beyond the surface. There's a spiritual world and ultimately God, creator behind the scenes. You're just being able to point in a direction and speak to me and encourage me and let me know that I'm not alone.
Okay, so this happened to you at the age of 6. Now, has there ever been a time in your life where you did not believe in your own purpose? And when that happened, what did you do to shift out of that, change gear and come back into that life where you believed that purpose was the most important thing?
I love that. That is, I would say, fast forwarding on the timeline,
Yeah.
when I felt like
I
I
think this
was.
conversation's going to go back and forth.
We'll go through the multiverse of madness. We'll do a little Avengers and just going into the different sequences and timelines.
Correct,
We're going
correct.
to do that. I'm going to jump forward into the ether and go forward into actually up until 3 years ago. So all the way into my 30s. And for me, I came from 3 years ago, I moved away from a 9 to 5, 10-year career that I had in the corporate sales world, in the big corporate world. I was very successful, one of the top sales reps in the telecommunications industry in Canada, within the TELUS, one of the three main big guys in Canada. There's Bell, there's Rogers, and there's TELUS. And I worked for a TELUS retail dealership, being in sales. So I was on the front lines of selling phones and TV, internet, everything that you can possibly think of for communications. I was a frontline rep for consumer and for business, and I was very successful. I had a very successful career, heading right towards very comfortable career. But I felt that when I reached the 10-year mark, 10 is a really important number, and I felt that, okay, can I see myself doing this for another 10 years? And I had to answer that question internally and say, no, I can't see it because this would not be aligning with my DNA of design. And that's something that I talk about within the C Link, that every person I believe is created with the DNA of design, a specific way that they are created by God to be able to work in their functions in this world. And for me, I don't believe that staying in the corporate world would serve my full capabilities, even though I was very good at it. And through many different circumstances that drove me onward, including me trying to reinvent myself within the corporate world, I tried to offer my boss a solution saying, I want to reinvent my position, create a new position, and do a 6 month in Mexico, 6 months in Canada, work online, do a corporate, like an online sales hybrid type of role where I would drive traffic to the stores. And I was even willing to take a pay decrease for that offer that was vetted by many different corporate professionals and people higher up than my boss that all thought it was a great idea. But the answer I got, and I never forget this, sitting in the airport in Houston, Texas on a layover, talking to my boss on the phone, and he answers me after many weeks of not answering my proposal. And he says, Caleb, and I'll never forget this. It just sends chills, just chills of wonderment up my spine of how could you possibly say that? But he said, online sales do not work. And I was shocked. I was like, what? Yes, they do. And he said, no, online sales do not work, is what he said. And I was thinking, how can you say that? And he was like a dinosaur, right? The dinosaur mentality of not reinventing yourself. And I realized that, oh, wow, not only is he not willing to see the bigger vision, but he doesn't believe in the DNA of my design enough to be able to back me after giving 10 years of loyalty to his company. And that for me is the moment where I knew that I wasn't individually celebrated within that position. I was just another cog in the wheel, and I knew that I needed to move on. I knew that my purpose would not be in that place. I could have settled for it. Could have settled for the cult of comfort, the comfortable job, the comfortable paycheck, the comfortable career that many people do. But for me, my heart was telling me it's time to move onward because I can't possibly stay in an environment that won't allow me to reinvent myself and be able to use the full plethora of gifts that I have in my arsenal that I believe that God has invested in me. Because the great Martin Luther once said, to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. And I knew that if I went against my conscience and tried to stuff it and stay in a comfortable place, that I would be denying the calling that God's put in my life. So I moved on.
So now you move on. Okay, so now let's talk about your moving on and what what was the starting point? What did you do first and then what followed? Because I know that you now talk to a lot of leaders and you're also very intuitive, as you've mentioned, even at the start of the conversation, that you were able to, at the age of 6, you were able to have these very vivid dreams. And just take me through your journey from that point on when you said that, okay, my divine purpose is very different. What did you do next?
Going back into the timeline, let's go back into the past now again. And that is in my childhood years, I was homeschooled. I'm a homeschooling child, one of three brothers, two older brothers. I'm the youngest. And my mother homeschooled us in the Hebraic art of understanding dreams, of dream interpretation, the Hebraic method. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard of the Hebraic method before, but the Hebraic method is more or less adheres to the interpretation angle and the perspective similar to dream interpreters in the Bible like Joseph and Daniel that interpreted dreams for foreign kings that would have these crazy dreams. Nebuchadnezzar had the dream of the statue, and nobody could interpret it. Babylonian king in history. And King Pharaoh, or the Pharaoh of Egypt, he had dreams of cattle and of corn, of the ripe ears and the lean ones. And Joseph was able to provide that interpretation. So that interpretation of really that biblical perspective and that angle, but also that creator angle of one source, of one connection to God, where the interpretation is attributed to a divine higher power, a creator, a God. That's where I believe for me that comes into play. I was raised in the scriptures. I was raised in the mystics and those who had spiritual experiences as part of my homeschooling curriculum. So it wasn't just mathematics, social studies, science, language arts, phys ed, but there was more to it. It was that understanding dreams that God spoke then in the scriptures to the men and women in the scriptures. He spoke to different historical figures like Harriet Tubman and George Washington and people that we come to read about in the history books. But in their dreams, God was able to guide them through that inner compass and that roadmap and that seeing of that link because each one of us has that link. In fact, scientific factoid is by the time that you and I reach 60 years of age, we'll have slept 20 years of our life. So there's a big chunk of that code that is meant to be unpackaged. And for me, I was raised as a homeschooler. I was raised to understand dreams, to treasure them, to write them down, to bring them to my mother, especially because she was versed in this from a young age as well, too. So she passed on her knowledge. And then we gather as a family around the dinner table and share, okay, what did you dream last night? What did you see? And what do you think it means? And taking a step back and really chewing on it, no different than you chew on the food at the dinner table. And that was just something I was raised in with that awareness. When I was a teenager, fast forwarding a little bit here, when I was 18 years old, my mother decided that it would be a good idea, mother and father, it'd be a good idea to go to Africa, to go to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and see the world through a different lens, and to get outside of the North American bubble and to see people living in less fortunate conditions. So that really opened up the doors. We had our doors opened up to be able to go to East Africa
So
through a ministry there.
the entire family moved to East Africa.
We visited there. We visited there for weeks on end, for 2 or 3 week trips, 1 month trips. So we would go over as a mission, like missionaries, ministers, and we would go to orphanages, to medical clinics, to Bible colleges, to schools, to churches, and really just that was where I was introduced to my main passion in life, which is public speaking. Up until I was 18 years old, I hadn't spoken to anybody else except for my family, my soccer teammates, and my stuffed animals. I like to say that when I knew I was going to Africa and
Yeah.
I knew I was going to get up and speaking to total strangers, I started to test things out. And that was, I would take my Sammy bear, my teddy bear I was born with, and start to speak to my stuffed animals as if they were a live audience, imagining that I was speaking to people. And so by the time that I got in front of people, I wasn't really afraid necessarily. I was more just excited and nervous to making sure I got it right. But starting at the age of 18 in East Africa and going over many times, six or seven voyages with my parents, brothers, father, that's where I started to really learn how to do public speaking and really found my passion to ignite and inspire crowds from dozens to hundreds to thousands, even to radio in Tanzania after the 7 o'clock news, speaking to 5 provinces. Oh, you're live on the air, and you're going to talk to 5 provinces in Tanzania to a few million people, but you're live, you're on the air. It was
So
that
what,
was a fast
sorry.
track to the draining ground.
Okay, so what, when you say public speaking and you spoke to small group of people or thousands of people, or you were also on the radio, what is it that you were talking about?
Really, more or less to help people discover their DNA of design. The SSB method is what I'm talking about. So spirit, soul, and body. And really encouraging people that they're not alone in this life, that their purpose is not for naught, that God has a purpose for them, and taking them back into the timeline of our ancestors, that biblical timeline of back to Eden, of saying, okay, in the beginning, there was no world chaos. There was no death. There was no wars. There were none of these things. It was just harmony between humanity, men and women, and walking with God, and really encouraging people to step back into that restored place of being able to have communion with God without the crap that's in between, and really speaking to people in that regard through that creator perspective, through that Hebraic method, through my viewpoint, through my belief system, which is I believe in Jesus. That's my belief system, but just pointing back to that people are made in the image of God, that we're made in the image of God, that we have a purpose that's not by accident, and we have a specific set of skills that God has given us to be able to manifest on the earth, to steward as our talents, and to play out. Because every person has something. Like for me and for you, I can't put on your complete armor as much as you can't put on my complete armor. We can learn from each other.
Yeah.
But if I would try to become Payal 100%, then I'm not going to fulfill my purpose. No different than you trying to be 100% Caleb. And I liken it to, this is one of the things I talked about in Africa over the years, many years ago, but the whole armor principle, and this is something I've carried into right now, David's armor. And here we'll go into a little bit of a story here and just tying it into some great television. By the way, if anyone in the audience has ever heard of the House of David show on Amazon Prime, one of the top ranking TV shows based on the stories in the Bible, based on David and Goliath and that epic battle between shepherd boy and giant. And one of the things in the story that comes from the Bible that most people are not aware of is when David said, I'm going to fight the giant. And then King Saul says, oh, okay, fine, you can go. But before you go, you got to put on my armor first, because if you don't put on my armor, you're not going to be successful. And I step back from that example and I think, okay, how many times in our life are we told, oh, in order for you to conquer that goal or reach that business endeavor or to be able to fulfill that purpose, you have to put on this armor? How many times are we told with peer pressure from the conformity, from the con culture, that in order to be victorious, you have to put on the armor instead of following the DNA of our own design that God created us in with that image? And that's what I like to say. Don't put on somebody else's armor, because when David said, no, I don't want it, I'm going to use what God gave me, the staff, the stones, the sling, and we know the rest is history,
Yeah.
because if he hadn't have done that, then he wouldn't have slayed the giant.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So now you help a lot of people interpret their dreams. Can you recall one dream story that still actually gives you the chills when you think about it, and how it actually unfolded in real life? Is there any one story that, and I'm sure there are multiple, but any one that really stands out for you?
I would say going back to when I was 6 years old, one of the first dreams that I have in my dream journal, still have it in my chicken scratch writing, pencil writing, and that is the first major vivid dream experience that I had when I was around 6, 7 years old was I was in a castle, like in this nighttime setting where the gray smoke billows in from the darkness, and I'm sitting in this beautiful castle on these couches and these sofas, and I'm surrounded by people like they would be in medieval ages, of people in medieval costumes and people of the court and princes and nobles and princesses
It
and
was
people of
as
great stature.
it was as vivid as that. As
It was
vivid.
as vivid as that. And sitting there surrounded as if I was in my own medieval movie set, except this was a vivid dream experience where I can still see myself sitting on that couch, surrounded by these nobles, surrounded by my parents, surrounded by my brothers, who also were in their royal garb as well. Even I had royal clothing on. And I'm looking out into the darkness, out into the mist, out into the night mist. I see the gray smoke billowing in. And then I see this light come, and all of a sudden, this great knight in shining armor is standing there walking towards the building with her own escort. I found it was a she when she came up to me, and she walked into the building, came into the hall, and then knelt before the couch as if I was the king of the castle. And she said, my name is Joan of Arc. I have been assigned to your family, you and your family. And I woke up from that experience right in that moment. That still sends chills up my spine because it's one of the first vivid dream experiences that I remember. And when I think of Joan of Arc and when we think of dream interpretation language, I encourage my audience, something I've learned from a young age, and that is, what is this a picture of? Why Joan of Arc and not Marco Polo or George Washington, but why Joan of Arc? Why was it Joan of Arc that was dressed up as a knight and knelt before me and said, I'm assigned to you and your family, like a commission? Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. She was burned at the stake in real life and history because of believing that she would hear the voice of God and that God spoke to her through angels and through the cloud of witnesses and through saints, and not having to have a mediator from the Pope or from these bishops or cardinals, but a simple peasant girl from Lorraine could actually hear God's voice outside of the institutional religious church system, which was considered blasphemy, which is one of the reasons why she was burned at the stake, amongst other things of leading the French army to victory. But that played out in my life and my family's life, and it still does because of the intense cost of the calling of God upon my life and my family's life, of standing for what we believe against religious institutional powers of organized religion. Because throughout me and my parents and our family's life, we've tried to bring a Reformation message to the institutional organized Christian church. And that message is this, that we believe that everybody is empowered as a kingdom of priests. It says that in the book of Exodus. It says that in the book of First Peter, that there is a kingdom of priests unto God, and that when Jesus died on the cross and resurrected, he tore the veil, and the old system of one mediator, one pastor, one prophet, one apostle, one priest ended. And Jesus empowered everybody to go back to Eden again with no barrier to be able to speak to God for themselves, but not through religious control. And that's just a brief overview, but that's a playing out of much of the many years of cost that it's cost me and my family to stand for these beliefs, that we believe that God speaks to all people and we don't need to have a mediator except for Jesus. And that's something that has cost us greatly. Just like Joan of Arc and standing in the physical fires, we've stood in spiritual persecution and emotional fires from the organized Christian church system of many different denominations who say, oh, you have to submit under our covering or else. I'm like, no, Jesus fulfilled that. That is, that we believe in post cross, pre curse, not pre-curse post pre-cross, right? Like, or post curse pre-cross. Like we believe that the curse has been lifted so that we can all walk in that ability. But that's just letting you know and the audience know of something, this vivid experience that has played out through my life of standing for persecution. And really in the days where things were very difficult, and sometimes there are days that are very difficult. Okay, God, I sacrificed a lot. Do you hear me? Yes, I hear you, but also I know that you know that Hebrews 12 in the book of Hebrews says you are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And I believe that those cloud of witnesses are closer than our breath, that heaven is closer than our breath, that the Spirit of God will never leave us or forsake us. Though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Is that promise. But anyways, that's to answer that question. That first vivid experience of the Joan of Arc experienced still gives me chills today and has shaped my life for religious persecution, because that's what Jesus did. His main adversaries were not the Romans, were not even the sinners, as many people would say, classify, but it was the institutional powers. It were the Pharisees and Sadducees. And so that's where my main opposition in my own speaking, business and life and ministering in these different areas, my main opposition isn't people with different spiritual belief systems. It's not the New Age community. It's not the polytheist community. It's not the Buddhist. It's not the Muslim. It's not the Jew. Unfortunately, it's people who claim to follow the same belief system I do. It's the religious, institutional, organized church. And I don't believe that that's the model that Jesus portrayed.
So that, I'm assuming, was your divine nudge, the dream that you had at the age of 6. Okay. What I have read is that you blend deep spirituality with very sharp humor. So can you take us through a very unexpected moment when you were on stage and or even during a workshop, where there was this moment that actually, where you combine spirituality with humor, where actually still makes you laugh because of maybe the reaction that you got from the people you were talking to, or it was just something within you just to lighten up the conversation a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of my workshops that I was at. I remember this was probably back in 2017 or 18, where I was done my teaching on dreams. It was at a psychic festival, psychic fair. That was really interesting because a lot of people with different belief systems, but they love the language of dreams, right? And at the end, the audience is there, probably a room of 50, 75, 80 people. And I said, all right, does anybody have any dreams? Short ones, not long, epic storybook, because we don't want to be here all day or all week, but any short dreams that you would like to share. And then we can go into it. And so then the microphone started getting passed around the room, and there was a lady that was probably sitting 6 or 7 rows back. And she put her hand up and she said, I have a dream, but I'm not really sure I should share it. I think it might be too intense. And I'm like, okay, I've heard a lot. Try me, right? And so she giggles nervously and she says, I had this dream like I was being chased, but I was just like running out of the shower and I was completely naked and people were laughing at me. As soon as she said they were completely naked, like everybody in the workshop just started to chuckle and smirk and laugh. Who hasn't had a dream where you're running around naked or, your teeth are falling out, or it's one of those common dreams, right?
Yeah.
Everyone just burst out laughing. Is like, all right, just you could feel like obviously an intense topic about dreams, but just at that moment, just a lot of people were able to settle in. Oh, I'm not weird, right? Because a lot of people they feel shame when they should be bringing forth a dream that has great meaning, but they've been told, unfortunately, by our Western culture that, oh, if you share that, then it might be something literal and you should be embarrassed about it. No, these are metaphors and parables. So
Yeah.
we had a good laugh and it was great. But that moment of, okay, that being naked moment almost of, okay, everyone has these dreams. There's nothing to be ashamed about, and there's meaning behind it. And then after we had a good laugh, I was able to unpackage that and explain to her, all right, this is what's going on. And you might be feeling vulnerable as you're going from a place of cleansing from one place to the next. The spirit is with you and your journey is making a transition right now. And she's like, wow. So it went from laughter, rooms laughing, everyone's just lighthearted to that was really impactful. So
Yeah.
we're able to bridge the humor and the practicality. And I think that's such a beautiful thing about dreams is they can do that so often.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You work across so many different continents. So obviously the culture is very different and diverse. So how do you still manage to see humanity's spiritual hunger today, given how diverse the world is? You've mentioned Africa very frequently, but I do understand that you travel to other parts of the world as well. So, just a little very brief philosophy that you have that works for you and what you've
Yep.
and what you've seen.
Absolutely. I've been beyond Africa. I've been to the Philippines. I've been to the Middle East, been to Palestine, Israel, been to Europe, South America, Central America, all over Europe. And what I found in these travels that I've had is one of the core topics and principles that I talk about within the Sea Link that I've observed within these different cultures. And that is one of the greatest wrestling matches, so to speak, in I think in humanity, and that is the wrestling match between the trichotomous individual and the dichotomous individual. Now I'm going to explain what
Yeah,
that means from my perspective.
yeah,
Because our audience is like, what's trichotomous and dichotomous? What is going on with that? This is what I've experienced with that. A trichotomous perspective is the spirit, soul, and body perspective, the three-part being. And I find that the more farther away from the Western culture that I travel into these places in the East, in the Middle East, and Africa, and the Philippines, the more open that the culture is towards that connection of practicality between the intermersion of spirit, soul, and body, being spiritual beings with a mind, will, and emotions, with a body. But a lot of Western culture really preaches and really sells this mentality of we are a mind with a body construct and that's it. And spirituality is just something that we pick up off the shelf once in a while and we use when we get lost and we can't think of the answer ourselves. And that to me is this great wrestling match because I think it's such a shame in my perspective. that people may not think that spirituality is linked to our soul and to our body, because I believe that we're three-part beings. So within my travels, that's what I've noticed. I've noticed that the cultures that are more embrace spirit, soul, and body are more open to some of this mystical dream language and just this ancient depths and this roots. Whereas a culture or a group of people I'm speaking to that are more or less locked in on mental and physical, it can be harder to get through. But I think that's where parables and storytelling and allegories and speaking in riddles really is a good lure to send out to see if people are hungry, to see if people really are hungry after, these pearls, because it says in the scriptures, don't cast your pearls before swine. That's one of the things that Jesus said. And we have pearls, and really testing out to see who's hungry and who's not. It's definitely the great balancing act, isn't it? But that's something I've observed over my travels for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And you're absolutely right that different approach and the way you probably communicate with the people also makes all the difference. Yeah, no, I get that. Okay, Caleb. So when listeners finish this episode, what story do you think and hope that they start living differently because of what they've heard today in this conversation?
I would say what I would hope that they would live differently is that our spirituality is not something that's disconnected from our day by day human construct and our walk in life. It's not something that is just like a holiday or like Christmas or Easter or like our birthday that we pick up once in a while for inspiration, but it's interwoven within the very fabric of our DNA, within our DNA of design. That our night season is a launching pad towards dreams that everybody dreams. Maybe if you've never heard this message before, audience, you are a dreamer as well too. And one of the things I like to say is keep a dream journal next to your bed, because there's something that happens within the subconscious. There's a release within the subconscious when we expect to receive something, then it's going to trigger and activate something else. And that can be within our dreams, receiving and accelerating more and more dreams. I would hope that our audience, and my hope and prayer is that our audience would see from this episode after today that our spirit, soul, and body framework is a part of our entire individual human walk. And dreams are a part of that. History is a part of that. Our day by day life and activities, everything happens for a purpose. And I would just hope that there would be a MPA, a multiple perspective advantage of stepping back and saying, oh, what's happening here in my day? Oh, that was interesting. What is God trying to tell me? What is Spirit trying to tell me? What is my higher power trying to tell me within my day by day actions and my encounters and my night encounters as well? And using them as a divine roadmap and a code to help us. That would be my hope.
Thank you so much, Caleb. That was very, I would say, very, it's deep, and people need to understand that. And your messaging is very clear. And clearly, you've had from your childhood, you've been ingrained with it, and yeah, and you're doing a lot of good work. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed listening to you and having this conversation with you. Thank you for being on Melting Pot.
For sure. Yeah. And thank you, audience. And if you liked what you heard in this content,
Yeah.
I have a YouTube channel at the C Link where you can subscribe. I've got
And
free
seeing,
motivational content on there.
and the C is spelled SEE or SEA.
SEE, seeing, and then and then like a link, LINK. CSEE, the, and then link. So it's at sign C the link, at the C link. And
Okay.
that's my YouTube channel. And yeah, I would love to invite the audience, for those who are interested in hearing more and receiving more motivational content within the C link of your own life, spirit, soul, and body, and that framework of the DNA of your design. Please follow me on there. And of course, my website, calebmatthews.net, you can find more information there as well too. And I'll send the links to my personal websites as well. But thank you very much. I really appreciate this, Payal, for the invitation on the Melting Pot. This has been great.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.